Nothing speaks more of an adventure, at least to me, than that of the unknown. I am an adrenaline junkie. I do whatever I can to always live life on the edge. You only get one life to live, right? Anyways, a couple years ago, a few buddies of mine came across the trend of geocaching. For those of you that don't know what it is, it's essentially where you place a small item, typically a trinket of some kind, and give out coordinates to the item's location. My like-minded friends and I started doing this a couple years ago, but we added a twist to this activity. We only geocache at night. This is obviously dangerous. Most coordinates that we are given are either in remote areas of towns or on nature trails out in the middle of the woods. Being in either setting in the middle of the night is obviously not ideal. One night I came across the coordinates online of what appeared to be located in an abandoned subway station that was no longer accessible to the public. I asked my friends if anyone would be willing to take on this challenge with me, but it was too late notice for them, which was fair. Typically, when you post coordinates online, you leave a hint of how to find the trinket or whatever it might possibly be. The hint given to these coordinates was the text, "What is the price for a soul?" Interesting. If the idea of looking in an abandoned subway station late at night wasn't scary enough, the description was certainly cryptic at best. I packed my things for the geocache, which included my backpack, a heavy mag light with new batteries, and my pistol. I arrived at the bad part of town in the late hours of the night. There were some random people still about, but for the most part, the town was quiet. I approached the boarded-up entrance to the subway and checked around to see if anyone was watching. It didn't take long to see that one of the boards had been removed and placed in front of one of the doors, appearing to still be nailed into place. Someone clearly moved it some time ago. I pulled out my flashlight and began my descent down the subway stairs. Surprisingly enough, there were still emergency lights guiding my path downwards that still gave off a green luminescent glow, much like the ones you see on an exit sign or a smoke detector. It wasn't much light, but it was enough to guide me to where I needed to go. Before I got to the bottom of the stairs into the main area of the subway station, I began to hear what sounded like an eerie groan coming from the darkness below. The emergency lights stopped at the base of the stairs. The subway area was only illuminated by my flashlight that I had brought. I checked my phone for the exact coordinates for where this geocache was, and of course it told me to venture deeper into the darkness of the subway. I hesitated. I was alone and I was in the dark. If something were to happen to me down here, there was a good chance that my body wouldn't be found for a while. I could just come back later when it's daytime. Wait, it would still be dark since it was underground. How cool would it be to find this geocache by myself? It would be the ultimate trophy to show my fearlessness. I decided to keep pushing forward. I looked at my phone to see if I was getting closer. Of course, my Wi-Fi began to go out the further I went underground. Soon enough, my phone was no longer connected to the internet, and I had to guess to where I needed to go. I could hear the groaning even more now. I could tell that it was coming from a source that was no longer disrupted by obstacles, meaning it was probably in the same area as me. I heard a shuffle come from behind me, and I instinctively turned my flashlight off. I pulled out my pistol for a good measure. I could see the faint green glow coming again from inside one of the tunnels itself, the same area where I was being led by my phone before I lost the internet. The glow became my guide, and I quietly went into the tunnel, hoping to stumble across something that looked like a geocache. I walked for about 5 minutes until I could no longer hear the groaning behind me. I figured this was enough space for me to turn my light back on, so I did. I kept walking and I shined my flashlight around for a few minutes. I then caught a figure standing in the middle of the tracks in front of me. I gripped my pistol and stared at the figure before realizing that it gave off a familiar pale look of a mannequin. Who leaves a mannequin in an abandoned subway? I was about to turn around, as this was probably the creepiest thing I'd ever seen, when I noticed that the mannequin was holding something. It didn't even register to me that this was the geocache until I walked over to it and picked it up. The mannequin was holding an old leathered book that looked rough and worn. The leather on the book was cracked and faded in a brownish yellow. On the cover was a symbol that I was not familiar with, but when I opened the book, I saw that it was titled, "The Price for a Soul." This was the geocache. I had found it. Before I read anything else in the book, I swiftly put the book in my bag and took off back towards the entrance. I followed the green lights again, and sure enough, I made it back to the stairs. I didn't bother turning off my flashlight this time since I was literally running out and I had my pistol drawn. No one was going to mess with me. I made it back to the surface and went back to my car. I turned it on, but rather than driving back immediately to my house, I pulled the book out of my bag and I began reading. "The Price of a Soul" was the title, and it didn't take long for me to realize that this book was about a ritual that anyone could perform in order to sell one's soul for anything. I have heard about things like this before, but I didn't really believe them. I've heard about the rich or the super social elite selling their souls for money or for fame, but holding this book made me realize that this could possibly be a real thing. Hypothetically, if I were to sell my soul, it would be for money. A couple million, obviously. But like most things, I didn't believe in souls and I didn't believe in rituals. Just to humor my curiosity, I looked at the conditions to perform this ritual, and it required only for me to verbally say that I was selling my soul to a particular entity for whatever amount, and then I'd have to kill someone to seal the contract. Wow, this was crazy stuff. Whatever, it was a cool find, but nothing more. I put the book back in my bag and started driving. I drove back that night and I placed the book on my table in my kitchen and went to bed. I don't normally dream, but that night was different. I was in a dark field where there appeared to be an entity with its back turned towards me. I couldn't see the entity very well despite not being that far away, as if there was a fog or it was underwater or something. It spoke softly. "I could give you anything you know," it said. I was then shown myself living this amazing life that I'd always dreamed of. Before I could really enjoy everything, it spoke again. "You don't even believe in souls. What do you have to lose?" The entity had a good point. Nonetheless, I would be killing someone. Before I could think more about it, I was jolted awake. It was still early in the morning, about 5 or so. Next to me in the bed was the geocache I had just recovered a few hours ago. The book. The dream and the book being next to me seemed to have really messed with my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I began thinking about that life that I saw, and how easy it would be for me to get away with killing someone. I could even go back to the tunnel I was in earlier and find some poor soul and dispose of them in there. No one would be able to catch me that way. Ever since I had gotten that book, my mind seemed to be slowly warping into this fantasy of selling my soul. It would be easy. I spent the whole next day absolutely fixated on this idea. I could be rich tomorrow. My days slowly dragged as this thing got in my way. I felt this urge to fulfill this ritual and become what I felt I was meant to be. When I got home from work, I found the book and read it cover to cover. It only took me about an hour or so, but it was an amazing read. Each page was more interesting than the one prior. On the last page under the conditions, there appeared to be a piece of the page missing. The part I could read about was how to break a time loop if I broke the conditions to the ritual. I didn't know what that meant, so I just kept reading. What I really got from all that was that I was selling my soul, and the only condition was I was not allowed to kill anyone else after I sold my soul. This was obviously something that I wouldn't have an issue with since I'm not a psychopathic serial killer. It said that if I killed someone after the ritual, then I would be put in a time loop and killed for all eternity, or until the time loop was broken. Okay, whatever that meant. I decided that I could go back into that tunnel and find an unsuspecting victim in there I could use as a sacrifice. The ritual said that it would not protect me from the law if I got caught, so I would be on my own for that. To get away with it, I would make sure I'd have my gun with me, but I would probably want to use a knife so it wouldn't be too loud. I would go back into the subway in the cover of night like I did last time. I went back later that night to that same area. I brought the book with me just in case I forgot anything. I made sure to bring my flashlight and the pistol like I did before, but I also brought a large kitchen knife that was unsheathed. I read over and over in the book the ritual to make sure that I wasn't missing anything. It seemed very straightforward and too good to be true, but I felt this crazy urge to at least try it. I pried the same board back that I did the night prior and entered into the subway station. It seemed much darker this time, although nothing really changed. Instead of hopefully avoiding people like I did last time, I was actually hoping to find a single person, all alone. I have seen countless movies where people are killed quickly and quietly, but I have no real idea what to expect. I reached the bottom of the stairs and I heard the same moaning from the night prior. I slowly made my way over to the noise. It didn't take long for me to find the source, and sure enough, it was an old man laying in a small camp made with tarps. I drew my knife, and before I went over to kill him, an entity appeared before me. It took the appearance of some goat-like creature, but I'm fairly certain it was the same being in my dream. "Are you offering this life and your soul to me?" it said. I found it hard to breathe, but I managed to say yes. "What is the price for your soul?" the creature asked. This was a good question I actually didn't think about beforehand. What is a good price for my soul? I thought about it and I finally answered. I told the entity $10 million, to which it nodded and faded away. I then knew what I was doing was serious. I walked over to the man, to which he saw me and my knife and tried to get up. He was slow and very weak, and making him my sacrifice was very easy. I didn't enjoy it, so I'll spare you the details, but I made sure that I was going to get my $10 million. Once I finished killing the man, I looked up to see that someone had just walked out from one of the tarps. I drew my pistol and aimed it at the person, but then remembered my contract. I panicked and ran away, but I left the knife out of desperation. My plans of making a clean kill were now out the window. Not only did I leave a witness, but I also left the murder weapon. Great. I made every rookie mistake out there, and I was probably going to get caught. I ran out of there and out to my car. Other than the other person that saw me down there, I don't think anyone else did. I sped most of the way home, but eventually calmed down. Once I returned home, the nightmare scenario was practically behind me. I then realized that I had no idea how I was going to receive this money I just sold my soul for. I sat up that night thinking about what had happened when I got a knock on my door. I checked the time to see that it was about 3 in the morning, so I grabbed my pistol that was still holstered in my belt. I was half expecting to see the police when I peeked out the side window, but rather I only saw a black duffel bag right in front of my door. I immediately knew what it was without even looking in the bag. I opened the door, grabbed the heavy bag, and closed the door. Inside were stacks of $100 bills. My excitement had exceeded anything I'd ever experienced in my life. I then realized I had to find a way to explain this money to my bank and other people in my life. The next day, the first thing I did was call into work and obviously quit. I had no more need for money. This obviously made a lot of people upset, but it was not my problem anymore. I went to the bank and opened a half-dozen accounts and put a few million into each. I sold my car and purchased something nice, but not too flashy to draw people's attention. I bought a new Lexus and some new clothes. I barely made a dent in the money I just acquired. I began looking at homes, and sure enough, I found something to my liking. I sold my lease to my apartment that week and moved out another week later. My life had improved so much after that. With all the extra time I had from not having to work, I was able to actually find what I wanted to do with my life, and that was to run a business. My old life of being poor and scrounging for money was over. I was able to enjoy life at a completely different level. A few years later, I had finally had a successful business and making a good amount of money. I had nearly forgotten about the contract and the entity that I sold my soul for. That was until something happened. I was coming home one night after signing a large account for one of my businesses. I had a little to drink that night, but I wasn't drunk. As I was driving late that night, the next thing I know, a car driving in the oncoming lane comes into mine. Everything goes black and I thought that I had died, but unfortunately things were much worse. The next thing I know, I'm waking up in a hospital bed. A nurse and what looked like a policeman comes in and checks in on me. The policeman informed me that I had just encountered a head-on collision with a drunk driver and received a heavy concussion. The other driver was in critical condition and wasn't looking to last through the night. My head was hurting so badly that I couldn't think about anything. I barely even registered what the policeman had told me. The next day, after much evaluation and medication, I was released from the hospital and I went home to sleep off this terrible headache I had. I woke up later that evening to a phone call from the same policeman I had talked to earlier. He had news that at first didn't mean anything to me. He told me that the drunk driver that had hit me had died. It then hit me like a ton of bricks what had happened. I didn't say anything and I just hung up the phone. The next thing I knew, I was passed out on my bed. I had a vision of the entity that I sold my soul to. He only said one thing to me, but it shook me to my core. He said, "The contract is broken." When I awoke, the time displayed on my alarm clock was 2:47 a.m. I went to roll over, but then I heard what sounded like someone breaking glass downstairs. I slowly got up, grabbing a flashlight and a knife off my bedside table. Sliding off my bed, I put my feet down carefully and began walking, avoiding the creaky spots on the floor as to make less noise. I was about halfway down the hallway when I heard a sharp sound of hooves on tile. My heart stopped. The only place in my house where I have tile was at the base of the stairs, the very stairs I stood 15 feet from. I sidestepped into the bathroom, closing the door softly. All the while, the thumping sound was slowly walking up the stairs. I could now hear a heavy breathing. The footsteps had passed the bathroom and now sounded like they were in my bedroom. Not wasting any time, I slowly opened the bathroom door and began to walk down the stairs. There were these massive marks on the stairs shaped as if they were goat prints. I heard an inhuman screech from upstairs, before I started to hear the sound of shredding fabric. When I reached the base of the stairs, there was a sudden pain in my foot. I looked down to see glass all over the floor. I let out a small squeak of pain. Suddenly, all the sounds from upstairs had stopped. A low double-tone growl began. I skirted my way along the edge of the broken glass, before making my way to the kitchen. There, I grabbed a dish towel and began wrapping my foot with it, as I heard a crash come down the stairs. I crouched down before crawling under the center island of my kitchen, scooting against the patch of exposed wall, holding my breath. I then saw two very thick furry legs ending in hooves of a goat. There was a low double-tone rasp before the thing spoke in a broken sadistic voice. "I smell you." I let out a sharp intake of breath. The creature froze before chuckling. It began to lean down. I could now smell its breath. It was rancid, like spoiled meat mixed with strong odor of sulfur. I could now see one yellow glowing orb. Grabbing my knife, I stabbed it directly in the creature's eye, as this creature let out a horrifying scream. When I slid out from under the island, I tried to run again before I felt a sharp pain in my foot. I began limping towards the garage, grabbing the keys off the wall. I heard shattering glass as the thing in the kitchen knocked over different things before I heard a raging screech from the beginning of the hallway, directly behind me. I got to the door, slamming it shut and locking it with the key on my keychain. Before a large bang was heard from the door, I looked back to see the metal bending. I unlocked my car and hit the garage door opener. I could now hear violent scratching at the door. I made my way into the car, starting it, and pulled out as the creature broke through the door and slammed it into the wall on the other side of the garage. Its remaining eye had shifted from yellow to a burning red. I could now see that the creature had a skull for a face with long ram horns curling it downwards. It stood about 8 feet tall and was black with a hint of brown and burgundy in its fur. There was a dark substance leaking from the glowing orb, where the hilt of my knife sparkled in the moonlight. Taking my eyes off this monstrous display, I looked back at the road to see a massive semi. Everything went black. When I woke back up in my bed, the time displayed on my alarm clock was 2:47 a.m. I heard the sound of breaking glass coming from downstairs.